My name's Peg Duthie. I'm filling in for our Minister of Music Ministries, who's off at the UU Music Ministers Conference, finding new hymns and songs for us. In the meantime, this morning's songs will begin with number 42, Morning Fair to See. Please rise in body and spirit and let us sing together. So all the songs today have to do with greenery or summer or nature. The next one is number 66, When the Summer Sun is Shining. This morning's song is in the Turquoise hymnal. It's number 1067, Mother Earth, Beloved Garden.
Grass and root, herbs to heal us, plants
Thank you. Please take a moment to greet one another.
Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift.
I'd like to welcome you into the spirit of worship with these words by Robin Wall Kimmerer in my new favorite book, Braiding Sweetgrass. I looked around the garden and could feel her delight in giving us these beautiful raspberries, squash, basil, potatoes, asparagus, lettuce, kale and beets, broccoli, peppers, Brussels sprouts, carrots, dill, onions, leek, spinach. It reminds me of my little girl's answer to, "How much do I love you?" "This much." With arms stretched wide, they replied. This is really why I made my daughters learn to garden, so they would always have a mother to love them long after I'm gone. The epiphany in the beans. I spend a lot of time thinking about our relationship with land, how we are given so much and what we might give back. I try to work through the equations of reciprocity and responsibility, the whys and wherefores of building sustainable relationships with ecosystems, all in my head. But suddenly there was no intellectualizing, no rationalizing, just the pure sensation of baskets full of mother love, the ultimate reciprocity, loving and being loved in return. Well, once upon a time, a long time ago, and this is a true story, so it was before this nation was a nation. It was on the East Coast, which was still a British colony, and it's about a man named Thomas Potter who lived right on the edge of the ocean. He had a small farm. He had a lot of trees. He had an abundant harvest that summer, but he went out into the ocean to get even more of a harvest. What do you think he harvested in the ocean? Yeah, lots of fish. And there was this kind of stripers. They were running, and he went out there and he got really bushels of fish, and he brought them in. But he saw something out there really interesting that was unusual. He saw the wind blew in a big schooner, big clipper ship with big sails, because that was before they had motors or anything, and it got caught on a sandbar. in the bay, right outside of where he was fishing. And he noticed that they brought a smaller boat, they called it a brig, and they put on some of the cargo to take up to New York City, because New York City was close by. But it wasn't enough to get the boat light enough, to get it off the sandbar. So then he noticed that all the sailors and one other man got into a rowboat and rowed to shore. And there was something about that man who wasn't a sailor that fascinated him. He just had this gut feeling. He said, I had a feeling in my gut. Well, he wasn't surprised that night when that man knocked on his door and he invited him in. And the man said, well, my name is John Murray, and I was on that big ship, the Hand in Hand, and all of us, we had no more supplies because we were supposed to get to New York City. And so we all came in, we're at the tavern, but we're looking for supplies. And the little girl over there in the next house told me that you caught a lot of fish today. And I wanted to know if I could buy some of those fish. And the man said, well, I'm Thomas Potter, and I'm happy to give you the fish. It was a gift from the sea, and it's my gift then to you. He said, oh, no. And they had their bickering, but he finally accepted this gift, this harvest of these fish. And then Mr. Potter, Thomas Potter, said, why don't you come back and sleep at my house? It's a lot more comfortable than the tavern after you bring the fish to the rest of the people from the ship. So he did that. Well, when he came back that evening, John Murray said, I first thought that there was this building next door to your house was your house when I came over. But I peeked inside, and it looks more like a chapel. And he says, yes, I built that chapel 20 years ago. And I've been waiting for a minister to come and preach about the love of God. And quite honestly, the Baptists preached there for a while, the Methodists preached there for a while, but I told them they couldn't have the chapel because they always talked about just some people were going to get the love of God. And I think, it says everybody. The love of God reigns on all alike. And he said, I got this weird feeling when I saw you get off the boat that you are that preacher. And that you're going to preach in my church on Sunday. And John said, no. I don't think he called him crazy, but he said, no. That's just a bad idea. You really don't want me to do that. And he went to bed feeling very disturbed because what John Murray didn't tell his new friend was that he had been a preacher in England. He had preached universalism, which was the love of God, but he got kicked out of the Methodist church because they didn't agree with him. And just as he lost his job, his beloved wife got very ill, and then his little baby boy, and they both died. And he owed so much money to the doctor that they were going to put him in prison, debtor's prison. And the only choice they gave him was to go to prison or go to the colonies, to the Americas. He said, I sign up for the ship. And as he got on that ship, he said, he promised himself, I'm starting fresh. I will never, ever preach again. He swore that. So he's like, this is weird. This guy's asking me to preach. I swore I'd never preach again. So the next morning, all day long, Thomas Potter is saying, you're going to preach on Sunday, right? And all day long, he kept saying, no. By the end of the day, he was worn out. And he said, okay, if the wind changes so that the ship can get blown in the right direction to get off the sandbar, I'll leave and I won't preach. But if it doesn't change, and I'm here, I'll preach on Sunday. Well, Thomas Potter, all the next day, he's going, Okay, I'm going to go tell everybody in town, right? I'm going to tell them that you're going to preach tomorrow morning. And he's going, no, the wind still might change. It's only half a day to go. It could change. But that evening, he finally said, oh, I guess I better, it hasn't changed yet. I guess I better just admit it, that I will be preaching in the morning. So he said yes. And Thomas Potter goes into town. He tells everybody. Now, the reason he wants to tell everybody is that for the last 20 years, people are like, so why did you build that chapel? What are you waiting for? It's never, ever going to happen. They probably were saying he was kind of out of his mind behind his back, and he knew that. So he wanted them all to show up. So the next morning, John Murray walks into this chapel. It's small, but it is packed, standing room only. And in the front is Thomas Potter with his family, just looking very happy, just full of gratitude and joy. And John Murray gets up there, and he's a good preacher. And in those days, they preached a long, long time. So he probably preached about the love of God for like 2 hours. And then he's, amen. He's done. And the sailor comes in, and he walks down the aisle, and he says, John Murray, the wind just changed. John Murray starts to walk out to go on the boat, and Thomas Potter says, wait a minute. I know you have to leave, but this is your home. Anytime you want to come here, please come back. And he did for several years. He came back and made that his home as he went out into the byways and highways preaching the everlasting, unconditional love of God. And my story is over, the only universalist miracle that we have. And we will now sing the children out to their activities. And it looks like we're gathering back here. Great.
Good morning. My name is Lori Stevens. I'm a member of this congregation, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here this morning. And to those who are joining us online, all to worship. In order to reach a wider community than those able to be physically present on Sunday morning, portions of this service are live streamed and available on YouTube or Facebook or on our website at thefun.org. Before I continue, let me remind you to please silence your cell phones. As Unitarian Universalists, our spiritual paths vary, but in this congregation, we have made a covenant together. We affirm our interdependence, celebrate our differences, and work for justice. We deepen our relationships as we create a compassionate, welcoming community, nurture spiritual growth, and act on our values in the broader world. I want to extend a special welcome to visitors worshiping with us this morning. We ask that you wear those little paper name tags because it helps us to get to know you better. If you're seeking a spiritual home, we hope that you may find it here. Whether you are new to Unitarian Universalism or visiting from another UU congregation, we invite you to stop by the welcome table after the service to have questions answered. People become members of this congregation by signing the membership book and supporting the church with their time and finances. If you're considering joining the church, please talk to Gail, I think, this morning. Yes, talk to our Reverend Gail this morning. Let's see. Following the service, we hope everyone will enjoy coffee and fellowship in the social hall, where you will also find information about current opportunities for engagement and reflection. There are a number of announcements in the weekly bulletin, which I hope you will take home and read. And I have one more. Wednesday night dinners are going to return from summer break on August 8th at 6 p.m. in the social hall. Yay! The dinners are catered except for fourth Sundays, which are potlucks. An $8 admission is charged for the catered meals to defray costs. Meat and vegetarian options are provided. Come join us to enjoy a meal with others in our FUUN community. Thank you.
like to invite you all to take a deep breath. Bring yourself more fully present to this sacred space, to this gathered community, and to yourself. And as you become more fully present to yourself, you may become more aware of those moments from the last weeks or days or hours that you bring here with you, especially those moments that have struck your spirit at its heart. If any of you have such a profound joy, sorrow, or concern that you'd like to make more present to this gathered community, you're invited to do so. Our lay minister this morning, Gloria Ballard, will help you. What we do is we take one of these, you pick a stone and you place it in the water. And then if you would like Gloria or me to read of that joy or concern, you'll notice there are little yellow slips of paper in your pew. Please write it out as legibly as possible and hand it to me when you're placing the stone in the water. Thank you. I'd like to invite you to hold this joy, this concern, as well as all those joys and sorrows that lay there unspoken in your hearts in the spirit of prayer. Spirit of life and love, have we forgotten what enough feels like? As we think about summer starting to slow down, school's starting this week, many of us are wondering, do I have enough time to show my love for my children, to care for them and bring them up and go to work? Some of us, as we look out at the injustice, the violence in our city and in our world, we wonder if we have enough energy and wisdom and time to turn the world towards more justice, to bend that arc of the moral universe towards more justice. And yet, this feeling of sufficiency, enough, starts in the heart. It starts in the gut. It gives us that understanding in every cell of our body that there are human limits to what we can do, and that we must just give ourselves time to rest, to reach out in loving arms, to be together, to enjoy the harvests of this season, and to sleep. We pray that we may take that time to turn inside and find that enoughness that lives in our core of our heart and spirit, and to have mercy upon ourselves and others as we accept our human limits. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen. At this time, our offering will be received. This month, 1/2 of the loose cash that you put in the plate, in our Share the Plate, is going to the Palmer Lecture. The Palmer Lecture is a human rights lecture that we sponsor every year in memory of the first called minister of this congregation, Robert Palmer, who was very active in the civil rights movement here in the 50s and 60s. And we've had a lot of interesting speakers, many of them nationally known. James Lawson was one of my favorite, but last year it was Jim Cooper, our U.S. representative. So we are looking forward to having that in the fall, and we're just so grateful for your ongoing generosity.
Good morning and happy August. I'd like to share with you a little about my earth-centered mindfulness practice. It's really a practice of cultivating awareness of the rhythms of the earth, which I call being pagan. I've been practicing for about 15 years, and what I have trouble remembering about the changing of the seasons is that the temperature change comes last. Part of me still stubbornly wants to stick to the 4 seasons as I learned them in kindergarten: spring, summer, fall, and winter. Swimsuits versus sweaters. Seasons clearly defined by their temperature and the human response to that temperature, namely, what do we wear and what do we eat? But in my pagan practice, there are 8 seasons, and they all have their own distinct characteristics, their own story of change and growth. Right now, because it is August, we just entered the season of Lammas. During Lammas, fall has started, but we humans might not have noticed. I find it to be a time of maximum incongruence between how the natural world around me is changing and how little I am forced to respond. Instead of doing fall-like things, like breaking out my blue jeans and jacket layers, I just tend to feel extra stressed out, as if I missed something important, but I can't figure out what. Since this is the South, I choose to mostly blame it on the heat, but really I think it's something more than that. When I say fall has started, I really mean it. The temperature change comes last. The earth and the sun have already done their solstice dance for the longest day of the year, and now the darkness is coming back to balance the light. In another 6 weeks, the nights will once again equal the days. I'm already noticing that the morning light has changed. Instead of bright, full sunlight at 6 a.m. when my kids decide to jump out of bed and race each other to the kitchen, it is now a more muted, gentler morning light. It makes it much easier for me to go back to sleep until my alarm goes off in a few minutes. The plants, as beings that live literally off of sunlight, are also changing with the sun cycle. I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I used to feel pity or even scorn for the first yellow leaves of August. I'd think, oh, those poor trees, they're just giving up in the August heat. But no, those trees are way ahead of me. They know that fall is here. Those gold leaves are the first harbingers. Lammas is also the time of first fruits and the gold of the grain harvest. Like I said, the plants are way ahead of me. Their timing is just right, and it is during this long slide to the fall equinox that they begin to fruit. If you have a garden, you might be awash in tomatoes right now, or ripening corn. For me, I seek out fresh figs picked directly from the sun-warmed tree. I spend all year looking forward to them. It is this idea of first fruits that really speaks to me in my own practice. The idea of investing long, hard effort toward a goal and then finally reaping the first fruits of that labor is an experience that I think is universal. It applies to the world around us, the literal fruiting of plants and other natural processes, and also to our very human lives. We have all invested long, challenging effort toward a distant result, and we have all had the experience of finally seeing that effort begin to pay off. Sometimes there are things that happen naturally through biology, like kids who are eager to grow up. I hear about that a lot at home. And sometimes they come through focused willpower, like college degrees. I think then that the season of Lammas teaches us the story of first fruits on a visceral, fundamental level. Each year at this time, we practice being in relationship with the first fruits of the harvest season. This builds familiarity so that each time first fruits of any kind come into our lives, we can have that feeling of, I've done this before. I know how to do this, how to savor this first success and keep going. It may start with the first figs and tomatoes and corn, but it extends to social, professional, and spiritual life as well. First days of college, first paychecks, first epiphanies after long contemplation. For my family this year, Lammas is especially succulent. Our youngest, Carmen, is starting school. For the first time this Tuesday, I will be rushing both kids out the door and down the road to Norman Binkley Elementary. I really see this as a first fruit of parenting. It cues me to contemplate how far we have come in our relationships together. Carmen, as a baby, was strong and opinionated from birth. I find myself remembering all the late nights, the 2 years of nursing, and her first steps that were really dance moves, bopping her way across the kitchen. We have fed and watered, tended and loved this small human. And now here we are with a precise, stubborn kid with an agenda who is ready and eager to go to school. This is a big change, a big transition. She is ready, and we are sending her out into the world just a little, but more than we ever have before. There are lots of feelings all at once, maybe some sadness that will be away from her for so much more of the day, but also this feeling of freedom that now we're able to pursue some personal and career goals that have been on hold. She's not grown yet, but there are still many years ahead of parenting, teaching, modeling, but this is one of those first fruits, a milestone, a juicy, heart-full moment. I find that I am leaning on my understanding of first fruits as we prepare Carmen for school. The story of these larger experiences stays with me, bringing to mind other moments, like watching my first garden ripen or plucking that perfect fig from the tree, the joy of things long awaited coming to fruition, and the trust that there are more wonderful fruits to come. For our meditation today, I'd like to invite you into contemplation of your own experiences of Lammas and first fruits. You may not have heard the word Lammas before, but I am sure that you have all lived through many Augusts and Septembers. I invite you now to turn your attention to how gravity is holding your body in space. Notice your feet on the floor. Notice your rear on the seat. Feel free to turn your gaze inward or close your eyes. Allow your breath to deepen, filling your belly with each inhale. Allow your shoulders to come down away from your ears and give permission for the small muscles of your face to relax. Now that we are each more present and centered in our bodies, we will place ourselves in context upon the earth. I'm going to ask a series of gentle questions, and I invite you to hold the answers in your mind. These are all things that we notice without necessarily paying attention to our noticing. By changing our attention, we change our awareness. Let us begin with the air of the season. What do you notice about the air this time of year? Have you thought it felt sticky or soupy outside? What is the air like when you go inside? How does the air feel before an afternoon thunderstorm? How does it feel after the storm? Have you seen the pavement steaming off the rain this year? How does the air smell in the early morning? How does the air feel in the evenings? And now the fire of the season. Have you had any sunburns this year? What flames do you light this time of year? Have you been grilling out, lighting candles or chalices? Have you been around a campfire lately? What color is the sun at noon right now? What color is the sun at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day? The water of the season. What is the last water you touched? Have you been rained on recently? Do you remember the last time it rained? What smell do you associate with water right now? And the earth of the season. What is the freshest thing you've eaten lately? What does the dirt smell like? What trees have you noticed lately? Have you noticed any trees with changing leaves? And finally, now that we are more fully present with ourselves and the season, take a moment to think about your own first fruits. What are some of your most memorable first fruit experiences? What first fruits are you looking forward to now? Take one last deep breath and open your eyes when you're ready. Thank you.
Let us join together in singing hymn number 69 in a silver hymnal, Give Thanks. Please rise and body your spirit.
And for barns that are heaped
Well, it's good to be back. I always go home in July. I always get to visit my mom and my dad, who are in their 90s. And my mom grew up on a farm near where she lives now. It was a subsistence farm during the Depression. Everything they ate or had, they either grew or bartered. Many of you grew up that way. I know some of you people who grew up that way, and some of you remember parents or grandparents who grew up that way. And she doesn't remember much. She sits looking out the window a lot, and her major entertainment is watching for the wind to change. She loves to watch the wind blowing through the trees or a flag that is outside one of the windows, and she gets very excited every time. And she does remember when it's south or north. She's got that down. Oh, the wind has changed to the north. The wind has changed to the south. And she's at a stage of life where she doesn't really, at first people remember their childhood more than they remember what happened 20 minutes ago. But that was the last couple years. But now she really doesn't remember much of her childhood. But this summer, as we moved towards August, and the corn ripened, and the abundant harvest of corn was ripening, and we could bring home that fresh corn, she had a memory of abundance. She remembered, and she told me, when she was a little girl, every August, the corn would ripen, and she and her big sister would go out into the fields, and they were told they could pick all the corn they wanted, and they would pick armfuls full. And my grandmother had a big wood stove, and of course they didn't want to have it too hot, but she would get it up as hot as she could, put just a small bit of water in a huge pot, and steam up that corn. And they were told the only time of the year you can eat all you want. There is enough. There is enough. And here she is, really at the end of her life, holding a rich harvest of knowing that there's enough. She pays attention to every moment. She's full of love. She's kind. And she has these images that she was loved. There was enough in her life. Enough. So I started thinking about all the ways that we think there's not enough in our life, and how we're rooted to this earth. We are nature, part of nature. And we live in a culture that's always telling us that that's not enough, that we need to be changing things, that we need to be better and doing more and fixing everything and working all the time. Now, they worked all the time, but there was still that sense at harvest that there was enough. I think why it's so hard for us, I think, is that the message is our worth is based on what we buy, how much money we have, how big our house is, or how I understand, the young people tell me, how our Facebook and Instagram page reflects a perfect human being. And it's so hard to remember that being fully human is part of nature. Being fully human is having limits, always. We're not ever going to change that. We've got our human limits. We can't do everything all the time. We just can't. So I started thinking, and I was surprised as I was thinking about this, that the story I wanted to tell was the story of John Murray, but I always tell it from John Murray's point of view, because he was the one, he wrote about this in his journal, so that's how we read it. But this year I realized that I want to tell it from Thomas Potter's point of view, because I realized on some gut level I was really curious about this man who not only held this vision that he had, this faith, for so long, even when people thought he was a little unrealistic. And then when it happened, the way John Murray describes it, he sat there and he just enjoyed that first harvest of it happened, it has come to fruition, and he sat there beaming with happiness. He received it. It was enough. And I realized I had a similar experience, but I had more trouble receiving it this June. And I've spent all summer trying to receive it. So let me tell you, many of you know I have spent my whole 30-year career as what is sometimes called an after pastor, which is just 30 years ago, I did my internship 30 years ago this year. And it was in a church that had several ministers who had abused their power and really hurt a lot of members. And so there's a certain skill that I was taught on how you slowly rebuild trust in ministry. And it requires not just an individual high ethical standard, but a professional high ethical standard, which the Unitarian Universalist ministers at that time had not agreed upon at all. Now, many of you are social workers or counselors or doctors or other medical people, and you know that you have very straightforward standards when it comes to ethical behavior. For instance, let's say sexualized behavior, thou shalt not have any sexualized behavior with anyone that you serve or supervise. I mean, it's pretty clear. And at the beginning of my career, I started working with the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association, and then later with our Unitarian Universalist Association, to develop such guidelines. People here in this church have helped with that. And it took years before we got that simple guideline, but there was always this big but, because somebody would come up at our annual meeting, which is every June. So every meeting, somebody would come up and say, but, that's fine, but I married somebody in my congregation. So does that mean people can't marry someone in their congregation? But I live in a rural area and there's nobody to date except people in my congregation. So how am I going to date? And so what people did was developed over these very painful conversations about 2 pages of buts. Like, if you're not supposed to have sexualized behavior, but if you want to date someone in the congregation, this is what you have to do. And, many of you already know this, that when somebody says, for instance, I love you, and then but, you kind of don't care about the I love you part, It's whatever comes after the but is what is the real important part. So these buts were a real problem. Pain in the butt, right? They were a problem. And so there was a lot of work being done on this. 30 years of work. So this year, last year, everybody at the UMA was mad at me because I was naming names. Some of you know this, and got threatened to be sued, and they didn't like that. And so everyone was like, this year everybody was like, thank God for Me Too. The wind has changed. Everybody looked at me like, how did you know? I'm like, what do you mean, how do I know? It's like people say you're a prophet because you did just describe what's been happening for the last 30 years, and then when they finally see it, then you're a prophet. That's why people think prophets can tell the future. It's because prophet's just telling you what's happening. I am no special person. But finally I was like, they gave me an award. Oh, she knows. She always saw it. Anyway, it's crazy. But the thing that was really amazing, I'm sitting there at the meeting, and they go, okay, the board, the UU Ministers Board, gets up and they say, we want to get rid of these 2 pages in our guidelines. And I look at them, and they go, oh, it's all the buts. I'm going, okay, I'm getting myself ready for microphones on both sides, long lines about why we can't get rid of that, because that's what always happens. And one person comes up to the microphone and says, young minister, I'm on the fellowship committee, which is the body that credentials UU ministers and takes away our credentialing if we screw up. She says, I'm on the fellowship committee, and the fellowship committee requests that you get rid of all the buts, because ministers who are in training come in and they say, okay, can I do it or not? Can I have sexualized behavior with people or not? And there was nobody else came up. There was no conversation. And then they voted to get rid of all the buts. And I'm sitting there. What just happened? What just happened? For 30 years. And then it just happened. The harvest has come. The harvest has come. I just want to say, oh, thank you. Thank you, that helps me. I need to take that in. And it's not just me, it's so many people, and those friendships and that camaraderie and people working together. But I feel like, yay, there's a harvest. So I look at each one of you, and I know that you're all in the different parts of the cycle of life, the different seasons of life, and that every single one of you has a different kind of harvest that you are nurturing, it hasn't happened yet, and other harvests that you can take in and enjoy and feel that sufficiency, that with all your human limits in this earthly home, you are enough. May it be so.
Our closing hymn is by a Filipino minister. It's number 182 in the silver hymnal, Oh, the Beauty in a Life. Please rise in body and spirit and let us sing together. Please remain standing.
Please join me for the chalice extinguishing, which is written at the bottom of your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
I'd like to close with these words by the poet Joy Harjo. Remember the earth whose skin you are, red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth. We are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them, listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind, remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember you are all people, and all people are you. We are earth. Remember you are this universe, and this universe is you. We are earth. Remember, all is in motion, is growing, is you. We are earth. Remember, language comes from this. Remember the dance language is, that life is. Remember, we are earth. This service is over. Let our service begin again, renewed.